She thought she would marry a handicapped billionaire, but what happened at the wedding left her stunned. Before we start the story, tell us which country you're watching from. Elena Moreau's fingers cramped around the hospital billing statement, the numbers blurring through her exhausted tears. 3 jobs, 16-hour days, and still, it wasn't enough. Her mother's cancer treatments had consumed their modest savings months ago, leaving Elena drowning in a sea of medical debt that seemed to grow deeper with every passing week. "Miss Moreau?" The soft voice belonged to Dr. Chen, her mother's oncologist, whose kind eyes had delivered too much bad news lately. "There's someone here to see you. Says it's about a unique opportunity." Elena's heart clenched. Debt collectors didn't usually visit hospitals, but desperate times made people creative in their pursuit of payment. She smoothed her wrinkled scrubs. She'd come straight from her morning shift at the diner and followed Dr. Chen down the sterile corridor. The man waiting in the family conference room wasn't what she'd expected. Impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, he sat in a wheelchair with the quiet dignity of someone accustomed to being underestimated. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jawline sharp, and his green eyes held an intensity that made Elena's breath catch. "Miss Moreau, I'm Adrian Blackwood," he said, extending a manicured hand. "I believe we can help each other." Elena had heard the name whispered in the same breath as words like billions and empire, but seeing him here, in this sterile room that smelled of antiseptic and desperation, felt surreal. She shook his hand, surprised by its warmth and strength. "I don't understand," she managed, settling into the chair across from him. Adrian's smile was careful, controlled. "I have a proposition. I need a wife, for legal reasons involving my inheritance, and you need financial security for your mother's treatment." He paused, studying her face. "I'm not offering romance, Miss Moreau. I'm offering a business arrangement that could save your mother's life." Elena's world tilted. "You're asking me to marry you?" "A marriage of convenience. 1 year. In return, all your mother's medical expenses will be covered, plus a sum that will ensure both your futures are secure." His voice was steady, professional, as if he were discussing a merger instead of matrimony. "I realize this is unconventional, but my condition," he gestured to his wheelchair, "limits my options in traditional courtship. What would you do if someone offered you everything you needed, but at the cost of a loveless marriage? Share your thoughts below. Would practical security win over the hope for true love?" Elena stared at him, her mind reeling. This man, this billionaire, was offering her salvation wrapped in a proposal that felt more like a business contract. But as she thought of her mother lying in the bed down the hall, growing weaker each day, the moral complexity seemed less important than the chance to save the only family she had left. "Why me?" she whispered. Something flickered in Adrian's eyes. Vulnerability, perhaps, or calculation. "You're not impressed by wealth. When you walked in here, you looked at me, not my chair, not my suit, me." He leaned forward slightly. "I need someone who won't see this arrangement as a stepping stone to social climbing. Someone genuine." The word genuine hit Elena like a physical blow. If only he knew how far from genuine she felt most days, how she pretended to be strong when she was crumbling, how she smiled through her exhaustion, how she'd convinced herself that dreams of love were luxuries she couldn't afford. "I need time to think," she said, though they both knew her answer was written in the desperation she couldn't quite hide. "Of course." Adrian pulled a card from his jacket. "Call me when you've decided." But Elena, the use of her first name made her look up. "Don't decide based on what you think you deserve. Decide based on what your mother needs." Meanwhile, 30 miles away in his penthouse office, Adrian Blackwood stared out at the Seattle skyline, his reflection ghost-like in the floor-to-ceiling windows. The wheelchair sat empty beside his desk, a prop in the most elaborate test he'd ever devised. He'd been standing for the past hour, pacing actually, as he replayed every moment of his encounter with Elena Moreau. The way she'd looked directly into his eyes instead of dropping her gaze in pity. How her hands had shaken not with nervousness around his wealth, but with exhaustion from carrying burdens too heavy for someone so young. The tears she'd tried to hide when she thought he wasn't looking. Elena Moreau's fingers cramped around the hospital billing statement, the numbers blurring through her exhausted tears. 3 jobs, 16-hour days, and still, it wasn't enough. Her mother's cancer treatments had consumed their modest savings months ago, leaving Elena drowning in a sea of medical debt that seemed to grow deeper with every passing week. Miss Moreau? The soft voice belonged to Dr. Chen, her mother's oncologist, whose kind eyes had delivered too much bad news lately. There's someone here to see you. Says it's about a unique opportunity. Elena's heart clenched. Debt collectors didn't usually visit hospitals, but desperate times made people creative in their pursuit of payment. She smoothed her wrinkled scrubs. She'd come straight from her morning shift at the diner and followed Dr. Chen down the sterile corridor. The man waiting in the family conference room wasn't what she'd expected. Impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, he sat in a wheelchair with the quiet dignity of someone accustomed to being underestimated. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jawline sharp, and his green eyes held an intensity that made Elena's breath catch. "Miss Moreau, I'm Adrian Blackwood," he said, extending a manicured hand. "I believe we can help each other." Elena had heard the name whispered in the same breath as words like billions and empire, but seeing him here, in this sterile room that smelled of antiseptic and desperation, felt surreal. She shook his hand, surprised by its warmth and strength. "I don't understand," she managed, settling into the chair across from him. Adrian's smile was careful, controlled. "I have a proposition. I need a wife, for legal reasons involving my inheritance, and you need financial security for your mother's treatment." He paused, studying her face. "I'm not offering romance, Miss Moreau. I'm offering a business arrangement that could save your mother's life." Elena's world tilted. "You're asking me to marry you?" "A marriage of convenience, 1 year. In return, all your mother's medical expenses will be covered, plus a sum that will ensure both your futures are secure." His voice was steady, professional, as if he were discussing a merger instead of matrimony. "I realize this is unconventional, but my condition," he gestured to his wheelchair, "limits my options in traditional courtship. What would you do if someone offered you everything you needed, but at the cost of a loveless marriage? Share your thoughts below. Would practical security win over the hope for true love?" Elena stared at him, her mind reeling. This man, this billionaire, was offering her salvation wrapped in a proposal that felt more like a business contract. But as she thought of her mother lying in the bed down the hall, growing weaker each day, the moral complexity seemed less important than the chance to save the only family she had left. "Why me?" she whispered. Something flickered in Adrian's eyes. Vulnerability, perhaps, or calculation. "You're not impressed by wealth. When you walked in here, you looked at me, not my chair, not my suit. Me." He leaned forward slightly. "I need someone who won't see this arrangement as a stepping stone to social climbing. Someone genuine." The word genuine hit Elena like a physical blow. If only he knew how far from genuine she felt most days. How she pretended to be strong when she was crumbling. How she smiled through her exhaustion. How she'd convinced herself that dreams of love were luxuries she couldn't afford. "I need time to think," she said. though they both knew her answer was written in the desperation she couldn't quite hide. Of course. Adrian pulled a card from his jacket. Call me when you've decided. But Elena, the use of her first name made her look up. Don't decide based on what you think you deserve. Decide based on what your mother needs. Meanwhile, 30 miles away in his penthouse office, Adrian Blackwood stared out at the Seattle skyline. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Miss Moreau? It's time. The ceremony space took Elena's breath away. The altar faced the water, where the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. White chairs held perhaps 30 guests, Adrian's business associates and a few family members, she assumed. She'd invited no one except her mother, too embarrassed to explain this sudden marriage to friends who still believed in love matches. But as she walked down the aisle, her arm linked with Dr. Chen's, who'd graciously agreed to give her away, Elena found her eyes drawn inexorably to the man waiting for her at the altar. Adrian sat in his wheelchair, dressed in a black tuxedo that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the sharp angles of his face. But it was his expression that made her steps falter. Gone was the controlled, businesslike mask he'd worn during their few meetings over the past month. In its place was something raw and vulnerable, a look of such profound longing that Elena felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crack. Have you ever had a moment when someone looked at you and you felt truly seen for the first time? Tell us about that moment in the comments below. When she reached him, Adrian extended his hand, and Elena placed her trembling fingers in his palm. His grip was steady, anchoring, and for a moment, the elaborate deception of their arrangement faded into something that felt startlingly real. "You're beautiful," he murmured, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. "Adrian, she began, but the officiant cleared his throat, beginning the ceremony that would bind them together for better or worse. Elena barely heard the traditional words, too caught up in the way Adrian's thumb traced gentle circles on her hand, the way his green eyes never left her face. When it came time for vows, she expected the brief, business-like exchange they'd rehearsed. Instead, Adrian's voice filled the evening air with words that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than their arrangement. "Elena," he began, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "I promise to protect what matters most to you, to stand beside you." His voice caught almost imperceptibly. "In whatever way I can, to honor the courage you've shown and the heart you've shared, even when it was difficult, and to never take for granted the gift of your trust." The words hit Elena like waves against the shore, each one washing away another layer of her carefully constructed defenses. These weren't the vows of convenience they'd planned. These were the words of a man who saw her, really saw her, and somehow found her worthy of protection, of honor, of something that felt dangerously close to love. Her own vows caught in her throat. She'd prepared something safe, practical, appropriate for their arrangement. But looking into Adrian's eyes, seeing the unexpected vulnerability there, Elena found herself speaking from a place she'd kept carefully guarded. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice carrying across the hushed gathering, "I promise to see you, not your circumstances, not your wealth, but you. The man who chose kindness when he could have chosen indifference, who offered hope when I had none left." Her voice grew stronger. "I promise to stand with you, to share your burdens as you've shared mine, and to prove every day that some people can be trusted with precious things." Something shifted in Adrian's expression, surprise, wonder, and something that looked like pain all at once. His hand tightened around hers as if she might disappear if he let go. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant announced, and Elena's heart stopped. They hadn't discussed this part. In all their practical planning, somehow they'd skipped over this most traditional of moments. Adrian's wheelchair put them at different heights, and for a moment, Elena wasn't sure how to bridge the gap. But then Adrian was moving, his hands gripping the arms of his chair as if to push himself up, and Elena reacted instinctively. She leaned down, her hands coming to rest on either side of his face, her lips meeting his in what was supposed to be a brief, ceremonial kiss. Instead, the world exploded into sensation. Adrian's lips were warm and soft and desperate, as if he were drowning and she were air. His hand came up to cup the back of her neck, fingers tangling in her hair, and Elena heard herself make a soft sound of surprise that became something deeper, more needy. The kiss lasted forever and no time at all. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena saw something in Adrian's eyes that made her feel like she was falling, not down, but up, into something vast and terrifying and wonderful. But then, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, Adrian did something that shattered every assumption Elena had built around their arrangement. He stood up. Not the careful, assisted movement of someone with limited mobility. Not the struggle she'd expected. Adrian rose from his wheelchair with fluid grace, his full height towering over her, his legs clearly strong and whole. The gathering gasped. Elena's bouquet fell from nerveless fingers, white roses scattering across the marble floor like fallen stars. "Adrian?" Her voice was barely a whisper, confusion and betrayal warring in her chest. "What? How?" He reached for her, his face a mask of regret and desperate hope, but Elena stepped back, her mind reeling. Everything, their meeting, his proposal, her decision, all of it had been built on a lie. "Elena, please, let me explain." But she was already backing away, her wedding dress rustling around her legs, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. The man she'd married, the man she'd somehow started to care for, didn't exist. The question was, who was the stranger standing before her? And why had he needed to lie to make her love him? The walls go up. Elena's bare feet slapped against the marble floor as she ran through Adrian's estate, her wedding dress bunched in her fists, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She'd kicked off the ivory heels somewhere between the altar and the main house, too desperate to escape the shocked faces of the wedding guests, and Adrian's pleading voice calling her name. The bridal suite felt like a prison now. Elena slammed the door and turned the lock, her back pressed against the ornate wood, as if Adrian might follow her. Her reflection in the antique mirror looked like a stranger, hair disheveled, makeup smeared, eyes wild with betrayal, and something else she refused to name. Her phone buzzed. Then again. Adrian's name flashed on the screen, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. How could she trust anything he said when their entire relationship had been built on deception? A soft knock made her jump. "Elena?" Her mother's voice, weak but concerned. "Mija, let me in." Elena's hands shook as she unlocked the door. Carmen wheeled herself inside, her face etched with worry and confusion. "What happened out there?" "Adrian, Carmen struggled for words. "He was walking. But he told us he couldn't. He lied." Elena's voice cracked on the words. "About everything. His disability, his reasons for needing a wife, probably even his name." She sank onto the silk-upholstered bench, her dress pooling around her like spilled cream. "I'm such a fool, Mama." I actually started to believe. "Believe what?" Elena pressed her hands to her face. "That someone like him could care about someone like me. Not for my looks, not for what I could do for him, but just me." She laughed bitterly. "But it was all an act. I was just another business transaction." Carmen wheeled closer, her weathered hands taking Elena's trembling ones. "Mija, you didn't see his face when you walked away. That wasn't the face of a man who was acting. Then why lie? Why the wheelchair? The whole story about needing a convenient wife." Elena's voice rose with each word. "What kind of man pretends to be disabled to trick someone into marriage?" Before Carmen could answer, Elena's phone rang again. This time it wasn't Adrian, it was Dr. Chen. "Elena, I'm sorry to call, but there's been a development with your mother's treatment approval." His voice trailed off awkwardly. "The payment authorization has been complicated." Elena's blood turned to ice. "What do you mean complicated?" "Well, given the circumstances at the wedding and the fact that the financial guarantor seems to have left, the hospital is questioning whether the payments will continue," Elena finished, her worst fears crystallizing. Of course. Adrian would withdraw his support now that their arrangement had fallen apart. Her mother's life hung in the balance of a marriage that had just exploded in front of 30 witnesses. When trust is broken, is it ever possible to rebuild it? Share your thoughts below. Would you be able to forgive someone who lied about something this fundamental? Elena ended the call and turned to her mother, forcing her voice to remain steady. "We need to go home, Mama." This was all a mistake. But Carmen was studying her daughter's face with the intensity of someone who'd spent 26 years learning to read every micro-expression. "You're in love with him?" "No." The denial came too quickly, too sharp. "You can't love someone you don't even know." "But you do know him. The man who offered to save a stranger's mother. That's real. The man who looked at you like you hung the stars. That's real, too." Carmen's voice grew stronger. "Whatever his reasons for the deception, the way he feels about you isn't fake." Elena wanted to argue, but the memory of Adrian's kiss rose unbidden in her mind. The desperate hunger in it, the way his hands had shaken when he touched her face, the raw vulnerability in his voice when he'd spoken his vows. Those things couldn't be manufactured, could they? A sharp rap on the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Elena." Adrian's voice muffled by the wood but unmistakably determined. "Please, 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." "Go away," Elena called out, but her voice lacked conviction. "I'll explain everything. The truth this time. About why I needed the wheelchair, why I chose you, why I—" His voice broke slightly. "Why I fell in love with my own wife." Elena's breath caught. Carmen raised an eyebrow at her daughter's reaction. "I'm not going anywhere until you hear me out," Adrian continued. "I'll sleep in the hallway if I have to. I'll cancel every meeting for the next month. I'll liquidate my entire fortune and give it to charity if that's what it takes to prove that this isn't about money or convenience or any kind of business arrangement." Despite herself, Elena found herself moving toward the door. "You said you fell in love with your wife," she said loudly enough for him to hear through the wood. A pause. Then, softer. "I fell in love with a woman who looked at me like I was worth something. Who promised to see me, not my circumstances. Who kissed me like I was the answer to a prayer she'd been too afraid to voice." Elena's hand hovered over the door handle. "But you don't even know me." "Not really. I know you work 3 jobs to keep your mother alive. I know you cry in hospital bathrooms when you think no one's looking. I know you haven't bought yourself new clothes in 2 years because every dollar goes to medical bills." His voice grew rougher. "I know you volunteer at the children's hospital on your only day off because you can't stand the thought of sick kids being alone. I know you leave half your lunch for the stray cat behind Murphy's diner. I know you're brave enough to marry a stranger to save someone you love." Elena's eyes widened. Those details weren't in any background check. They were things only someone who'd been watching her, really watching her, would know. "How do you—" "Because I've been falling for you since the first moment I saw you, and I couldn't help myself from learning everything I could about the woman who looked at a man in a wheelchair and saw someone worth marrying." Elena closed her eyes, her forehead resting against the cool wood. "But why lie? Why the chair? Why all of it? Because I've been hurt before. Because women have married me for my money and left when they got what they wanted. Because I needed to know that someone could care about me when I wasn't powerful, when I was vulnerable." His voice dropped to a whisper. Because I'm a coward who was too afraid to risk my heart without a safety net. The honesty in his admission cracked something open in Elena's chest. She understood safety nets, understood the fear of showing someone your true self and having them find you lacking. "Elena," Carmen said softly, "everyone deserves a chance to explain themselves. Even billionaires who make stupid decisions." Elena's hand closed around the door handle, but she didn't turn it. Not yet. "If I let you in," she called through the door, "no more lies. No matter how much the truth hurts." "No more lies," Adrian promised. "Even if it means you hate me for the rest of our very short marriage." Elena took a deep breath and opened the door. Adrian stood in the hallway still wearing his tuxedo, but his bow tie hung loose around his neck and his hair was disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. His green eyes were red-rimmed, and he looked like a man who'd just lost everything that mattered to him. "Hello, wife," he said, with a self-deprecating smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hello, husband," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. "Start talking." The walls begin to crack. The helicopter ride to Adrian's private island should have been romantic, a honeymoon escape complete with champagne and sunset views over the Pacific. Instead, Elena stared out the window in tense silence, while Adrian sat across from her, his hands clasped so tightly in his lap that his knuckles had gone white. They'd agreed to continue with the planned honeymoon, but not for the reasons Adrian had originally intended. Elena needed time away from the media circus that had erupted after videos of the wheelchair billionaire's miraculous wedding recovery went viral. And Adrian had promised her the truth, and some stories required more than a 5-minute conversation in a hallway. "The island has full cell coverage," Adrian said over the helicopter's roar, the first words either of them had spoken in an hour. "If you decide you want to leave before the week is up, I'll have you flown back immediately." Elena nodded without looking at him. She'd changed from her wedding dress into jeans and a sweater, but she still felt exposed, as if her emotions were written across her skin in languages she didn't understand. The island was beautiful, a crescent of white sand beaches surrounded by emerald water, with a modern glass house perched on the cliffs like something from an architectural magazine. Under different circumstances, Elena might have gasped at its perfection. Instead, she felt like she was entering another stage of Adrian's elaborate theater. "There are 3 bedrooms," Adrian said as they approached the house, his voice carefully neutral. "You can have whichever you prefer. I'll take the guest room in the west wing." "Separate rooms," Elena confirmed, relieved and inexplicably disappointed at the same time. "Separate rooms," he agreed. "Whatever you need to feel comfortable." But comfort, Elena was discovering, had nothing to do with sleeping arrangements, and everything to do with the way Adrian's presence seemed to fill every room he entered, making her hyper-aware of his every movement, his every breath. The first evening was a disaster of polite conversation and untouched gourmet meals. Adrian had dismissed the staff before their arrival, leaving them alone on the island with nothing but their tangled history and a kitchen full of food neither of them had any appetite for. Elena picked at her salmon while Adrian stared at his wine glass as if it held the answers to questions he was afraid to ask. "Your mother," Elena said finally, breaking the suffocating silence. "Is she?" "Dead. Cancer when I was 12. Adrian's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "My father remarried within 6 months. 3 times, actually, each wife younger and more interested in his money than the last." "Is that why you used a wheelchair to test your motives?" Adrian set down his wine without drinking. "Partly. My father taught me that everyone has a price, that love is just another commodity to be bought and sold. When I was 25, I thought I'd proved him wrong." Elena waited, sensing there was more. "Her name was Victoria. Beautiful, charming, claimed to love me for who I was, not what I had." Adrian's laugh was bitter. She married me, waited exactly long enough to satisfy the prenup requirements, then disappeared with half my assets and my best friend. Adrian. Elena's anger toward him softened despite herself. The worst part wasn't the money. It was realizing that she'd never seen me at all. I was just a bank account with a convenient wedding ring. He finally looked at Elena, his green eyes haunted. I swore I'd never be that naive again. Elena pushed her untouched food around her plate. So, you decided to test every woman who showed interest in you? Not every woman, just the ones who mattered. The admission hung between them like a challenge. I mattered? Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. From the first moment I saw you in that hospital room, looking like you'd fight God himself for 5 more minutes with your mother, you mattered. Adrian leaned forward. Do you want to know the real reason I chose you, Elena? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Because when you shook my hand, you didn't flinch. You didn't look at my legs with pity or calculation. You looked at my face like you were seeing a person, not a problem to solve or an opportunity to exploit. He paused. And when I offered you money to marry me, you looked horrified, not relieved. Elena remembered that moment, the way her stomach had dropped at his proposal, how wrong it had felt even as she'd recognized its necessity. You asked for time to think about it, Adrian continued. Do you know what most women would have done? Said yes immediately. Started planning how to spend the money, but you went home and cried for 2 hours because you thought accepting meant you were selling yourself. Elena's eyes snapped to his. How do you... I had someone watching you. Not invading your privacy, he added quickly at her expression, but making sure you were safe. My investigator reported that you sat in your car outside your apartment building sobbing because you hated that circumstances were forcing you to choose between your principles and your mother's life. Have you ever had to choose between what you believed was right and what you needed to survive? Tell us in the comments how you navigated that impossible decision. Elena stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the polished floor. You had me followed? I had you protected, Adrian corrected, rising as well. There are people who would hurt anyone connected to me, Elena. The moment you agreed to marry me, you became a target. A target you created by lying to me in the first place. Elena's composure finally cracked. Do you have any idea what it felt like, standing at that altar, thinking I was marrying someone who needed my care and protection, only to discover you'd been... what? Testing me like a lab rat? I know how it felt, Adrian said quietly. You know? Elena laughed harshly. How could you possibly know? Because I felt it too. Standing there, listening to your vows, realizing that you meant every word, that you were promising to see me, to stand with me, to trust me, while I was lying to your face. Adrian's voice cracked. Do you think that kiss was fake, Elena? Do you think the way I looked at you was performance? Elena's anger faltered at the raw pain in his voice. I fell in love with my wife at our wedding, Adrian continued. The woman who promised to share my burdens, who looked at me like I was worth fighting for. And in that same moment, I realized I'd destroyed any chance of her ever loving me back by building our entire relationship on a lie. Tears pricked Elena's eyes, but she blinked them back. So what now? We're stuck on this island for a week, and then what? We go back to Seattle and pretend to be married while you pay for my mother's treatment? We talk, Adrian said simply. We figure out if there's anything real underneath all the deception and hurt. And if there isn't, he swallowed hard. Then I let you go with enough money to take care of your mother for the rest of her life. And I spend the rest of mine knowing I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too afraid to trust it. Elena stared at him, seeing past the billionaire facade to the scared boy who'd lost his mother too young and learned too early that love could be weaponized. She saw herself in his fear, recognize the walls they'd both built to protect hearts that had been broken by people who should have cherished them. 1 week, she said finally. Complete honesty. No more games, no more tests, no more investigators watching me from the shadows. 1 week, Adrian agreed. Just us. No masks, no pretenses. The real me and the real you, figuring out if we're brave enough to try again. As if to seal their agreement, the island's generator chose that moment to fail, plunging them into darkness lit only by moonlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Well, Elena said, her voice holding the first hint of humor she'd felt all day. I suppose we're definitely stuck with each other now. In the silver darkness, she heard Adrian's soft chuckle, the first genuine sound of happiness she'd heard from him since their world had imploded at the altar. Maybe, she thought as she fumbled for her phone's flashlight, being stuck wasn't the worst thing that could happen to two people determined to find their way back to each other, or forward to something entirely new. The scars we carry. The generator remained stubbornly dead the next morning, leaving Elena and Adrian to navigate their forced proximity by candlelight and the gray dawn filtering through storm clouds. Elena had slept poorly in the master bedroom, too large, too luxurious, too full of Adrian's scent lingering on the pillows, while the sound of the ocean seemed to echo her churning thoughts. She found him in the kitchen, standing over a camp stove he'd apparently retrieved from some emergency supply closet, attempting to make coffee with the concentration of a man performing surgery. You don't have to cook for me, Elena said, her voice still rough with sleep. Adrian looked up, and Elena's breath caught. His hair was mussed, his expensive shirt wrinkled from sleeping in it, and dark circles shadowed his green eyes. He looked human in a way that made her chest ache. I'm not cooking. I'm barely managing to boil water. He gestured helplessly at the camp stove. I've had staff my entire adult life. I can negotiate billion-dollar mergers, but apparently I can't make coffee without electricity. Elena moved to stand beside him, close enough to smell his cologne mixed with something that was purely him. Here, she said, adjusting the flame. It's not that different from the diner equipment when it breaks down, which is basically every Tuesday. Their fingers brushed as she took the pot from him, and the small contact sent electricity up Elena's arm that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Elena, Adrian said softly, about yesterday. What I said about having you watched. We agreed on honesty, Elena interrupted. So be honest. What else don't I know? Adrian was quiet for so long that Elena wondered if he'd changed his mind about their week of truth. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I know about your father. Elena's hand stilled on the coffee pot. What about him? I know he left when your mother got sick the first time. I know you were 11 years old and came home from school to find half your furniture gone and a note on the kitchen table. Adrian's voice was gentle, careful. I know you spent the next 15 years convinced that love was conditional, that the moment you became too much trouble, anyone who claimed to care about you would walk away. Elena set the pot down with shaking hands. You had no right. You're right. I didn't. Adrian turned to face her fully. But I needed to understand why a woman who could have any man she wanted was willing to marry a stranger in a wheelchair for money she'd never have to pay back. Any man I wanted? Elena laughed bitterly. You really don't know anything about me. Then tell me, Adrian said simply. Tell me what I got wrong. Elena stared at him, at this man who'd lied to her and investigated her and somehow still managed to see parts of her she'd never shown anyone. The smart thing would be to deflect, to keep her walls up, to protect the tender places that still bled when touched. Instead, she found herself talking. I was 16 when I realized I was invisible, she began, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. Not ugly, not remarkable, just forgettable. The girl boys asked out as a joke or a dare. The friend other girls confided in about their real crushes because I was safe, non-threatening. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. I had exactly 2 boyfriends in college. The first one left when he found out about my mother's medical bills. Said he couldn't handle that kind of baggage in a relationship. Elena's voice turned hollow. The second one stayed longer. Almost a year. I thought maybe I'd finally found someone who could love me despite my complications. What happened? I found him in bed with my roommate. When I confronted him, you know what he said? Elena met Adrian's eyes, her own blazing with old pain. He said he'd never really loved me anyway. That I was good enough for now, but not the kind of woman men marry. Too serious, too damaged, too much work. Have you ever been made to feel like you're too much or not enough? Share how you overcame those voices in the comments below. Your story might inspire someone else. Elena, Adrian's voice was rough with anger. So when you offered me marriage, even a fake one, part of me was grateful. Finally, someone thought I was worth keeping around, even if it was just for show. She laughed shakily. Pathetic, right? I was so starved for someone to choose me that I married a man I thought was using me. You're not pathetic, Adrian said fiercely. You're the strongest person I've ever met. Strong people don't fall apart when their fake husband turns out to be able to walk. Strong people do whatever it takes to save the people they love, even when it costs them everything. Adrian stepped closer. Elena, those men were idiots and cowards. You're not too much of anything. You're not enough for them because they were too small to deserve you. Elena wanted to believe him, but 15 years of conditioning wasn't easy to overcome. You say that now, but you don't know. I know you sing off-key in the shower and cry at dog videos. I know you put extra syrup in the coffee of customers who look sad, and you always take the worst shifts at the diner so your co-workers can have weekends with their families. Adrian's voice grew softer. I know you read romance novels on your breaks because you still believe in happy endings, even though life has given you every reason not to. Elena stared at him. How do you know all that? Because I've been in love with you for months, Elena. Not the idea of you, not what you could do for me, but you. The woman who leaves her lunch for stray cats and works herself to exhaustion for people who don't appreciate her and still manages to smile like sunshine breaking through clouds. Months? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly vulnerable. I first saw you 8 months ago. You were leaving the hospital after visiting your mother and you stopped to help an elderly man who dropped his walker. You were so gentle with him, so patient. I watched you help him to his car and I thought... He paused. I thought I'd never seen anything more beautiful in my life. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. You've been watching me for 8 months. Not watching. Learning. I couldn't approach you normally because... Adrian's voice trailed off. Because what? Because I'm a coward, he said simply. Because I've never felt anything like what I felt watching you care for a stranger, and it terrified me. Because I knew that if you rejected me, really rejected me, not my money or my status, but me, I'd never recover. Elena stared at him, seeing the truth in his eyes, the vulnerability he was finally allowing her to witness. So you created an elaborate test instead. I told myself it was protection. Really, it was cowardice dressed up as strategy. Adrian's smile was self-deprecating. I'm very good at lying to myself when the truth is inconvenient. And what's the truth now? The truth is that I fell in love with a woman who looked at a man in a wheelchair and saw someone worth saving. The truth is that I've spent every day since our wedding terrified that when you really see me, the real me, with all my flaws and fears and terrible decision-making skills, you'll realize you deserve so much better. Elena felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Adrian, The truth is that I don't care about the money or the business arrangement or any of it, he continued, his voice breaking. I care about the way you make me feel like I might actually be worth loving. And I'm sorry, so sorry, that I was too afraid to trust you with that from the beginning. Elena wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her heart full of too many emotions to name. I need to know something. Anything. When you kissed me at the altar, was any of that real? Adrian's laugh was shaky, emotional. Elena, that kiss was the most real thing I've ever experienced. Standing there, listening to your vows, realizing that you meant every word, that you were promising to see me, not my circumstances. I forgot about the chair, the deception, everything except the way you were looking at me like I was your whole world. You were, Elena whispered, the admission slipping out before she could stop it. They stared at each other across the kitchen, the storm outside forgotten, the failed generator irrelevant. In the gray morning light, with coffee burning on the camp stove and their hearts laid bare, Elena finally saw what her mother had tried to tell her. The way Adrian looked at her wasn't calculation or performance or careful strategy. It was love, desperate, terrified, imperfect love, from a man who'd been as broken by the world as she had, and who'd somehow found the courage to risk his heart again, even if he'd done it in the most spectacularly stupid way possible. Finding each other in the storm. The storm that had knocked out their power seemed to settle in for a long siege, turning the island into their own private world of gray skies and crashing waves. By afternoon, Elena and Adrian had fallen into an unexpected rhythm, working together to keep the fire going, sharing stories over canned soup heated on the camp stove, existing in a bubble where the outside world couldn't reach them. Your turn, Elena said, curled up on the leather sofa across from Adrian, a thick blanket wrapped around her shoulders. They'd been trading childhood memories for the past hour, each story peeling back another layer of the careful facades they'd both maintained. My turn for what? Adrian asked, poking at the fire with an iron rod he'd found in the hearth tools. Tell me about the first time you realized you were rich. Adrian was quiet for so long, Elena thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice held a child's bewilderment. I was 7. My mother had just died, and my father sent me to boarding school in Switzerland. He set down the poker and turned to face her. The other kids talked about missing their families, about going home for holidays. I didn't understand why they were sad. I'd never had a home to miss. Elena's heart clenched. Adrian, the first Christmas, all the other boys went home except me and this kid named Marcus. Adrian caught himself. Another boy whose parents had died in a car accident. We spent Christmas Day alone in this massive dormitory. And I remember thinking it was normal, that this was just how life worked. Where was your father? Honeymoon with wife number 2. He sent me a Rolex. Adrian's laugh was hollow. I was 7 years old with a $50,000 watch and no one to call on Christmas morning. Elena set down her mug of cocoa and moved to sit beside him on the hearth, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. I'm sorry. The worst part wasn't being alone, Adrian continued, staring into the flames. It was realizing that my father could have come for me, could have brought me home, but chose not to. That's when I understood. Love was something other people got. For me, there was only money. Elena reached for his hand without thinking, her fingers intertwining with his. That's not true. Isn't it? Adrian looked at their joined hands with something like wonder. I've spent my entire adult life proving my father right. Using money to control situations, to protect myself, to test people's motives. Even with you. But you were wrong, Elena said softly. About me, about yourself, about all of it. Adrian's thumb traced circles on her palm, the simple touch sending warmth spreading through her chest. I married you, Elena said, meeting his eyes. Not your money? Not your business proposition? You. The man who looked at me like I mattered, who offered hope when I had none left. Even when I thought you needed care instead of partnership, I was falling for you. Even in the wheelchair? Elena's free hand came up to cup his cheek. Especially in the wheelchair. Because I thought I was seeing the real you. Vulnerable, honest, brave enough to trust a stranger with your heart. You were seeing the real me, Adrian said, leaning into her touch. Just not the whole truth. They sat in comfortable silence, hands joined, faces inches apart in the firelight. Elena could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing. Elena, Adrian whispered, can I tell you something I've never told anyone? She nodded. When I saw you walking down the aisle yesterday, I forgot how to breathe. You were so beautiful, so radiant, and for a moment I let myself believe that fairy tales might actually exist. His voice grew rough. Then you started saying your vows, and I realized you meant every word, and I wanted to stand up right then and tell everyone the truth. That I didn't deserve you, but I was too selfish to let you go. Why didn't you? Because I was terrified that if I confessed, you'd run. And I needed just a few more minutes of being the man you thought you were marrying. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Adrian, you are that man. Flawed and scared and making terrible decisions sometimes, but still that man. The one who saw a stranger drowning and threw her a lifeline. The one who spoke wedding vows like poetry because he meant them. I did mean them, Adrian said fiercely. Every word. Then show me. What? Elena's heart hammered as she spoke the words that would change everything between them. Show me the man I married. Not the billionaire, not the master manipulator, not the scared boy. Show me Adrian. Something shifted in his expression, surprise giving way to something deeper, more vulnerable. Slowly, as if giving her time to change her mind, Adrian leaned closer. Are you sure? He whispered against her lips. Instead of answering, Elena closed the distance between them. What moment made you realize you were truly falling in love? Was it a grand gesture or a quiet, intimate conversation? Share your story in the comments below. This kiss was different from their wedding kiss. Softer, slower, full of questions and promises instead of desperate hunger. Adrian's hand came up to tangle in her hair while Elena's fingers traced the sharp line of his jaw, and she could taste the sweetness of cocoa on his lips, could feel his heart racing against her chest. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said simply. Not my wife, not the woman I arranged to marry, but you. Elena Moreau, who cries at dog videos and sings off-key in the shower and makes the world brighter just by existing in it. I love you too, Elena whispered, the words feeling like stepping off a cliff and finding wings. Adrian Blackwood, who pretends to be cold and calculating but leaves anonymous tips that pay for struggling families' meals. Who builds children's hospitals and calls them tax write-offs. Who was brave enough to risk his heart even when he was terrified of getting it broken. Adrian's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. How did you know about the tips? Murphy told me about the mysterious customer who pays for meals he never orders. Described you perfectly, down to the expensive suits, and the way you try to look intimidating but tip like someone who understands what it means to be hungry. I was never hungry for food, Adrian said quietly, but hungry for connection, for someone to see past the money to whatever was worth loving underneath, that I understood completely. Elena traced her fingers along his cheekbone, marveling at the way he leaned into her touch, like a man starved for gentle affection. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Two people convinced they're unlovable, falling for each other while pretending it's all fake. The best kind of disaster, Adrian agreed, pressing a kiss to her palm. Although, Elena said with a sudden grin that made Adrian's breath catch, I have to ask, exactly how extensive was this investigation you had done on me? Because if you know about my secret collection of romance novels, we're going to have words. Adrian's answering laugh was pure joy, the sound filling the room like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. Your secret is safe. Though I have to admit, I'm curious about your thoughts on the billionaire romance subgenre. Terrible research, Elena said solemnly. Most of those billionaires are far too emotionally available. The real ones apparently prefer elaborate wheelchair deceptions. Only the best ones, Adrian corrected, pulling her closer. The ones who are desperately in love with women too good for them. As the storm continued to rage outside, Elena found herself thinking that maybe getting stranded wasn't such a terrible thing after all. Sometimes the best discoveries happened when you had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, nothing to do but sit by a fire and let someone see all your broken places. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, that someone would see your scars and love you not in spite of them, but because they understood what it meant to carry wounds that never quite healed. Sometimes love found you in the most unexpected ways, even if it had to knock out the power and trap you on an island to make it happen. When truth cuts deeper than lies. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows and the sound of the generator humming back to life. For a moment, she lay still, replaying the previous evening, Adrian's confessions, their kiss by the fireplace, the way they'd talked until dawn about everything and nothing. Her heart felt lighter than it had in years. Then she heard Adrian's voice from the main room, sharp and businesslike in a way that made her stomach clench. No, James, I don't care what the board thinks about the optics. The marriage stands, and so do all the arrangements. What do you mean investigation? I told you to close that file. Damn it, I specifically said no media involvement. Elena's blood turned cold. Investigation. Media involvement. The easy intimacy of the night before suddenly felt like another performance, another test she'd somehow failed without realizing it. She slipped out of bed and crept closer to the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. The prenup covers all contingencies, Adrian was saying, his voice clipped and professional. If she decides to leave, the payments for her mother continue, but she gets nothing else. No, that's not cruel. It's practical. I can't have people thinking I'm a complete pushover just because I fell for a pair of pretty eyes. Elena's world tilted sideways. Prenup? She'd never seen any legal documents beyond their marriage license, and the casual cruelty in his tone, fell for a pretty eyes, made her feel like she'd been slapped. Have the investigator compile a full report on her activities over the past week, Adrian continued. I need to know if she's been in contact with anyone from the media. And check her phone records. No. I don't care if it seems invasive. This is a billion-dollar empire we're protecting. Elena pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from making a sound. Every word was a knife twisting in her chest. Phone records. Investigations. Protection of his empire. Not his heart. His empire. The romantic angle is good for our image, Adrian's voice carried clearly through the door. The public loves a redemption story, especially when it involves disability and true love. We'll milk it for all it's worth. What? No. She doesn't know about the media strategy. She doesn't need to know. Elena backed away from the door, her legs shaking. She'd been such a fool. Again. Just like with David. Just like with every man who'd ever made her believe she might be worth loving. The night before, their confessions, their kiss, his declaration of love, it had all been another performance, another test, another elaborate manipulation by a man who saw her as a useful prop in his life story. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from her mother. Misha, Dr. Chen says the treatment is working better than expected. They're calling it a miracle. Thank your husband for me. You found a good man." Elena's vision blurred with tears. Her mother was getting better because Elena had sold herself to a man who thought of her as a media strategy, a useful narrative for his billion-dollar empire. She was still standing there, phone trembling in her hands, when Adrian appeared in the doorway. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, his smile warm and intimate, exactly like the smile from the night before, when she'd actually believed it was real. "I hope I didn't wake you with my call." James has terrible timing. Elena stared at him, seeing clearly for the first time. The concerned furrow of his brow was perfectly practiced. The way he moved toward her with just the right amount of hesitancy was calculated. Even the morning stubble looked artfully arranged. "Elena, what's wrong?" "Prenup," she said, her voice hollow. Adrian's face went carefully blank. "What?" "The prenup I never signed. The investigation into my activities. The media strategy." Elena's voice grew stronger with each word. "The romantic angle that's so good for your image. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was still lying to you? How did you handle the moment when you realized the person you loved wasn't who you thought they were? Share your experience below." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You were listening to a private conversation." "Was anything about last night real?" Elena asked, ignoring his deflection. "The confessions, the kiss, telling me you loved me. Was any of it actually true? Or was I just participating in another one of your elaborate tests?" "Elena, answer me!" The words came out as a shout, surprising them both. "Was last night real, or was it just the next phase of your media strategy?" Adrian ran a hand through his hair, his careful composure finally cracking. "It's complicated." "No, Adrian, it's not complicated. It's simple. Either you love me or you don't. Either you see me as a person worth honoring or as a useful prop in your carefully crafted narrative." Elena's voice broke. "Either our marriage is real or it's just another business arrangement with better marketing." "The feelings are real," Adrian said desperately. "Elena, what I feel for you, that's not strategy, that's not calculation, that's the most real thing I've ever experienced. But you're still investigating me. Still protecting your precious empire from the woman stupid enough to actually fall for your act." "It's not about you," Adrian protested. "It's about the people who would use you to get to me. The media vultures, the gold diggers who would try to manipulate you." "By having investigators check my phone records?" Elena laughed bitterly. "By creating prenups I never consented to? By discussing how to milk our love story for publicity?" Adrian's silence was answer enough. Elena walked to the dresser and began pulling her clothes from the drawers where she'd unpacked them the day before with such hope. "I want to go home. Elena, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" "How you spent all night telling me you loved me while your assistant compiled reports on my activities. How you made me believe I was finally worth choosing while you protected yourself with legal documents I've never seen." Elena shoved her clothes into her bag with shaking hands. "How you convinced me that this time might be different when you're exactly like every other man who's ever decided I'm not worth the risk." "That's not true," Adrian said fiercely. "You are worth every risk. You're worth more than my fortune, more than my reputation, more than any of it." "Then why are you still lying to me?" Elena spun to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Even now, even after everything we said last night, you're still protecting yourself, still keeping secrets, still treating our marriage like a business transaction that needs to be managed instead of a relationship between two people who supposedly love each other." Adrian's face crumpled. "Because I'm terrified of losing you." "Well, congratulations," Elena said, her voice deadly quiet. "You've managed to lose me anyway." She pushed past him toward the door, but Adrian caught her arm. Elena, wait. Please, I know I screwed up, but let go of me. Just give me a chance to make this right. Let go of me. Elena's voice was ice-cold fury. Adrian released her immediately, his face going pale. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. You didn't mean to grab me? You didn't mean to investigate me? You didn't mean to lie about the prenup? Elena's voice rose with each word. What exactly did you mean to do, Adrian? Because from where I stand, it looks like you meant to control every aspect of this situation while making me feel grateful for the privilege. I meant to protect you, Adrian said desperately. From what? From finding out who you really are? From discovering that the man I fell in love with is just another rich bastard who thinks love is something you can buy and manipulate and manage? The words hung between them like a blade. Adrian looked like she'd physically struck him. Is that really what you think of me? He asked quietly. Elena stared at him. This man who'd held her so tenderly the night before, who'd kissed her like she was precious, who'd made her believe that maybe finally, someone could love her exactly as she was. I don't know what to think anymore, she whispered. I don't even know who you are. She left him standing in the bedroom and walked out into the morning sunshine where a helicopter was already waiting to take her home. Adrian had probably arranged that too, another contingency in his perfectly orchestrated plan. As the island grew smaller beneath them, Elena pressed her face to the window and let herself cry for the dream that had lasted exactly one night. The dream of being loved by someone who saw her as more than a problem to solve or a narrative to manage. The dream of finally being enough. When pride battles love. Elena sat in her apartment 3 days later, staring at legal documents spread across her kitchen table like evidence in a crime scene. The prenup she'd never signed, the financial agreements guaranteeing her mother's treatment, the divorce papers that had arrived that morning via courier, requiring only her signature to end a marriage that had lasted exactly 4 days. Her phone had been buzzing constantly, reporters wanting statements about the miracle wedding, her friends demanding explanations, and 17 missed calls from Adrian that she couldn't bring herself to answer. She'd finally turned it off, desperate for silence to think. The apartment felt smaller than ever after the grandeur of Adrian's estate, but it was hers. No hidden cameras, no investigators watching her every move, no one calculating the publicity value of her grief. Misha? Her mother's voice was stronger now, the experimental treatment working its promised miracle. You haven't eaten today? Elena looked up to find Carmen studying her with the concerned eyes of someone who'd watched her daughter's heartbreak before and recognized the signs. I'm not hungry, Mama. This is about Adrian. It wasn't a question. Elena gestured to the papers. He wants a divorce. Clean break, no publicity, no messy complications. Very efficient. Carmen wheeled closer, her eyes scanning the legal documents. What do you want? It doesn't matter what I want. Elena's voice was flat. This was always a business arrangement. I just forgot for a little while. Did you forget? Or did you finally remember what it feels like to be loved? Elena's composure cracked. He doesn't love me, Mama. He loves the idea of me, the carefully vetted, properly investigated, media-friendly version of me that fits into his billion-dollar life story. And you love him. I love a man who doesn't exist. The Adrian from the island, the one who was vulnerable and honest and scared. That was just another performance. Elena picked up the divorce papers. This is probably for the best. We both get what we need. You get your treatment, he gets his clean exit, and I get to stop pretending I'm the kind of woman billionaires fall in love with. Carmen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice held the gentle wisdom of someone who'd loved and lost and learned the difference. Elena, when your father left, I was angry for a very long time. Angry at him for abandoning us, angry at myself for believing his promises, angry at love itself for being so unreliable. She paused. But you know what I learned? Elena waited. Love doesn't fail us. People fail us. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, people learn from their failures and try again. Carmen reached for her daughter's hand. Your Adrian called me yesterday. Elena's head snapped up. What? He wanted to make sure the treatment would continue regardless of what happened between you two. He also wanted me to know that he's putting your apartment building into a trust. No more rent, no more worry about losing our home. Carmen's eyes were soft. He said you deserved security whether you chose to forgive him or not. Elena's throat tightened. That's just guilt, Mama. Or strategy. Is it? Because he also asked me to tell you something. Carmen squeezed Elena's fingers. He said to tell you that he's fired all the investigators, canceled all the media strategies, and torn up every legal document except one. A new prenup that gives you half of everything if you'll give him a second chance to be the man you deserve. Elena stared at her mother. He said that? He also said, he knows he doesn't deserve your forgiveness. But if you could find it in your heart to see him one more time, he has something important to show you. When someone who hurt you asks for a second chance, how do you decide whether to trust them again? What would it take for you to forgive someone who broke your heart? Share your thoughts below. Meanwhile, across the city in his penthouse office, Adrian Blackwood stood before his floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the Seattle skyline blur through rain that matched his mood perfectly. The wheelchair sat in the corner, not a prop anymore, but a reminder of how far he'd fallen from the man he'd tried to be. Sir? James appeared in the doorway, holding a tablet. The divorce papers? Have they been signed? Not yet. But sir, perhaps you should consider... No. Adrian's voice was sharp. Elena will make her own choice. No pressure, no manipulation, no strategy. If she signs them, we honor that decision. James looked uncomfortable. And if she doesn't? Adrian turned from the window, his face haggard with 3 days of sleepless nights. Then I spend the rest of my life proving that I can be the man she thought she was marrying. Sir, about the building purchase, the medical trust, the new prenup. The board is concerned about the financial exposure. James, Adrian's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute authority. If you mention the board's concerns about my wife one more time, you'll be looking for new employment. Is that clear? Crystal, sir. Good. Now get out. I have something important to finish. Alone again, Adrian walked to his desk where a single sheet of paper lay waiting. His resignation as CEO of Blackwood Industries. Effective immediately. He'd spent the past 3 days liquidating assets, restructuring the company, and putting systems in place that would allow him to step back from the empire that had consumed his life. None of it mattered if Elena wasn't there to share it with. His phone rang. Carmen Moreau's number appeared on the screen, and Adrian's heart hammered against his ribs. Mrs. Moreau? She's coming, Carmen said simply. Tonight, 7 o'clock at the park where you first saw her feeding the stray cats. Adrian closed his eyes, relief and terror warring in his chest. Did she sign the papers? She's carrying them with her, Carmen said. What she does with them is up to you. The line went dead, leaving Adrian with 4 hours to find the courage to be completely, vulnerably, terrifyingly honest with the woman he loved. 4 hours to become the man Elena deserved, instead of the man his father had taught him to be. 4 hours to choose love over fear, truth over control, and Elena over everything else in his carefully constructed world. The park was nearly empty in the early evening rain, just a few joggers and dog walkers hurrying through the drizzle. Elena sat on the same bench where Adrian had first seen her 8 months ago, feeding scraps to the orange tabby cat that had claimed this corner of the park as his territory. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking nothing like the billionaire's wife the media had painted her as. The divorce papers sat in a manila envelope beside her, unsigned, but ready. She'd made her choice. The question was whether Adrian would make his. At exactly 7 o'clock, she saw him walking toward her through the rain. No driver, no security detail, no wheelchair. Just Adrian in jeans and a soaked jacket, looking like an ordinary man instead of a business mogul. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to talk, but far enough to respect her space. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. "Your mother-in-law can be very persuasive." Elena's voice was carefully neutral. "Elena, Let me go first," she interrupted. "I've had 3 days to think about what I want to say." Adrian nodded, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Elena stood, facing him directly. "I came here to give you these." She held up the divorce papers. "To tell you that I understand why you protected yourself, why you couldn't trust me completely, why you needed safety nets and exit strategies." Adrian's face went pale, but he remained silent. "I also came to tell you that I'm tired of being treated like I'm not strong enough to handle the truth. Tired of being managed and protected and investigated like I'm a potential threat to your well-being." Elena's voice grew stronger. "And I'm especially tired of falling in love with men who think I'm not worth the risk of complete honesty." "Elena, I'm not finished." She stepped closer, rain dripping from her hair. "But mostly, I came here to tell you that despite everything, the lies, the investigations, the business arrangements, despite all of it, I'm still completely, stupidly, hopelessly in love with you." Adrian's breath caught. "So here's my choice, Adrian Blackwood. I'm going to ask you one question, and I need you to answer with complete honesty. No strategy, no calculation, no protection, just truth." Elena's eyes never left his. "If I tear up these divorce papers right now, will you spend the rest of our marriage being real with me? The good, the bad, the terrifying, the beautiful, all of it?" Adrian stared at her, this woman who'd just laid her heart bare in a rain-soaked park, offering him everything despite how badly he'd hurt her. "Yes," he said simply. "Elena, yes. To all of it, to everything, yes." Elena smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her since their world had shattered on the island. Slowly, deliberately, she tore the divorce papers in half, then half again, letting the pieces fall to the wet ground like confetti. "Then let's go home," she said, "and start over." For real this time. Adrian moved toward her, then stopped. "Elena, there's something else. Something I need to show you first." He pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket. "This is my resignation as CEO of Blackwood Industries. I'm stepping back from everything. The empire, the board, the whole machine that turned me into someone who thought love was a liability to be managed." Elena stared at the paper. "Adrian, you can't." "I can and I will. Because you were right. I was still protecting myself, still keeping one foot out the door, still treating our marriage like it needed escape clauses." He stepped closer. "I don't want escape clauses anymore, Elena. I want you. Just you. For the rest of whatever life we build together." Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the billionaire CEO or the master manipulator, but the scared boy who'd spent Christmas alone in a boarding school, the man who'd been taught that love was conditional and trust was naive, the man who was finally brave enough to choose love anyway. "Keep your company," she said softly, "but promise me something else. Anything. Promise me that when you're scared, you'll tell me. When you want to protect yourself, you'll talk to me instead. When you feel like running, you'll stay and fight for us." Elena reached up to cup his face. "Promise me that you'll let me love you exactly as you are, broken places and all." "I promise," Adrian whispered, leaning into her touch. "Elena, I promise." And there in the rain-soaked park where their love story had really begun, Elena Blackwood kissed her husband like she was claiming him, like she was choosing him, like she was brave enough to believe that sometimes love really could conquer the fears that kept two broken people apart. Because sometimes the best love stories weren't about perfect people finding each other. Sometimes they were about imperfect people choosing to be vulnerable enough to try again. Love at last. 6 months later, Elena woke to the sound of Adrian singing in the shower, badly, as always, and the smell of coffee brewing in their kitchen. Not his kitchen or her kitchen, but theirs. The penthouse had been transformed over the months, filled with her books and his music, her plants thriving next to his expensive art, creating something that belonged to both of them. She padded barefoot to the kitchen where she found Adrian attempting to flip pancakes with the intense concentration of a man who'd only recently learned to cook for someone other than himself. "Good morning, husband," she said, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. "Good morning, wife." Adrian leaned back into her embrace, still marveling at how natural the words sounded now. "I made breakfast." "I can see that. How many smoke alarms went off this time?" "Only one. I'm getting better." Elena laughed, pressing a kiss to his shoulder blade. "You are indeed." The past 6 months had been a revelation, not the fairy tale perfection Elena had once imagined, but something better, something real. They'd fought about Adrian's tendency to solve problems with money instead of communication. They'd navigated Elena's insecurities about fitting into his world. They'd learned to trust each other with their fears, their flaws, their imperfections. "Your mother called," Adrian said, successfully flipping a pancake without setting anything on fire. "The doctors say she's completely cancer-free." Elena's eyes filled with happy tears. "Really? Really? She wants to know if we're ready for her to start planning our real wedding." Elena groaned. "She's been plotting that since we got back from the island." "Would you want that? A real wedding, with all our friends and family, where I promise to love you without any wheelchairs or elaborate deceptions involved." Elena turned him around in her arms, studying his face. "Are you asking me to marry you again, Mr. Blackwood? Every day for the rest of our lives, if you'll let me. What does real love look like to you? Is it the grand gestures, or the quiet daily choices to show up for each other? We'd love to hear your definition of lasting love in the comments below." Before Elena could answer, Adrian's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it and grinned. "What?" Elena asked. "James, the charity gala tonight raised $3 million for the Children's Hospital. Apparently, the love story that captured Seattle's heart was very good for donations." Elena rolled her eyes. "I still can't believe people are fascinated by our disaster of a beginning. It wasn't a disaster. It was just unconventional. You pretended to be disabled to test whether I was a gold digger. And you married a stranger to save your mother's life. We're both wonderfully crazy." Elena shook her head, but she was smiling. "The difference is, my crazy came from love. Yours came from fear." "Past tense," Adrian corrected, pulling her closer. "My crazy comes from love now, too." They stood in their kitchen, swaying slightly to music only they could hear, pancakes forgotten on the stove. Adrian had kept his promise. No more investigators, no more secret strategies, no more walls between them. When he was scared, he told her. When she felt insecure, she let him reassure her. When they fought fair, and when they made up completely. "Adrian," Elena said softly. Do you remember what you said at our first wedding? About protecting what matters most to me? I remember. You do, you know. Every day. Not just my mother's health or our financial security, but my heart, my dreams, my belief that I'm worth loving exactly as I am. Adrian's eyes grew suspiciously bright. Elena, and I want you to know that you don't have to earn that anymore. You don't have to prove you're worthy of love or trust or forgiveness. You just have to keep being you. The man who makes terrible pancakes and sings off-key in the shower and loves me like I'm the most precious thing in his world. You are, Adrian whispered. You absolutely are. Elena stood on her tiptoes to kiss him, tasting coffee and promises and the sweet certainty of forever. When they broke apart, she noticed smoke beginning to rise from the stove. The pancakes are burning, she said. Let them burn, Adrian replied, lifting her onto the counter. I have more important things to focus on. Like what? Like loving my wife. Like being the man she sees when she looks at me. Like building a life so beautiful that all the broken pieces of our past become just the foundation for something amazing. Elena's heart swelled with so much happiness, she thought it might burst. I love you, Adrian Blackwood, all of you. The CEO, the scared boy, the man who makes disaster pancakes and kisses me like I'm magic. You are magic, Adrian said seriously. You turned a cold, calculating bastard into someone capable of love. If that's not magic, I don't know what is. As the smoke alarm began to wail and they dissolved into laughter, Elena thought about the journey that had brought them here. The hospital room where they'd first met, the wedding where everything had fallen apart, the island where they'd found each other again, the park where they'd chosen to try. None of it had been perfect. All of it had been worth it. Because sometimes the best love stories weren't about perfect people finding effortless happiness. Sometimes they were about imperfect people choosing each other again and again, building trust from the wreckage of their fears, creating something beautiful from the broken pieces of their pasts. Sometimes love really was worth the risk. Sometimes, despite everything that could go wrong, everything went wonderfully, messily, perfectly right. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you found someone brave enough to love you, not in spite of your flaws, but because of them. Someone who saw all your broken places and helped you turn them into windows that let the light in. Elena had found her someone. And as the smoke alarm continued to shriek and Adrian fumbled to open windows while she dissolved into giggles, she knew with absolute certainty that she would choose him again and again and again, forever and always. Love at last. Thanks for watching. Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe.